History Classroom, and I am your African history professor, Professor Hicks. And welcome aboard. My light looks a little dark in here today, so I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna keep on keeping on, all right? And I'm coming to you in an impromptu broadcast, and want to discuss with you some of the current events mixed with some of the old history, all right? And that brings us to who our kingly master and our King Trump. And what seems to be disturbing a lot of people these last few days, of course, is the killing of that person. I'm not going to mention his name, and the person who assassinated him, and then the fervor that it has created amongst in the nation, particularly amongst young fervent Christians who seem to be the greatest supporters of this person. And also, I get a sense on the social platforms of the perplexity that people seem to be in as to how this man, Trump, can reignite his base and start this fervent activity throughout the nation. Yesterday, where I saw a group of white men with flags, American flags, Nazi flags, and Christian crosses all together, jumbled together, and screaming something to the effect of white men fight back. And then I saw the responding critiques of white men, many Africans who are reading this of fight back to what? And me too. At first I'm like, fight back? Well, we understand that the shooter was a white male who was part of Trump's ever growing, I don't know if it is growing or constricting his base. But we also see the responses afterwards of people. How in the world could they be blaming other people, particularly black people, at this? Because I think one of the HBCUs had went into a lockdown, went into classes suspension because they had received death threats from these nuts. And that perturbed me because these are young black men who should be arming themselves, surrounding their universities, doing night patrols in their cars, protecting their campuses and their women and people. But instead, they're going into what I call a cowardly lockdown. The heads of those universities should be struck and removed from office. Because if I was a head of that university and I received a death threat, I'd gather all the men from my college campus, all the black men, and those other people who might be interested in being a part of that, and I would put them on a military alert. And then I would send out a message to all of those who send those threats, we're waiting for you. Come on with it. But no, we're too busy shaking our asses. We're too busy in the clubs, and we're too busy doing the with Ashwa Kwesi. He abhorred these abhorred, I should say, these Greek fraternities. Because these people in these Greek fraternities have no idea what they're celebrating, have no idea. But yeah, they're involved in fraternities. Instead of locking down collectively, understanding the climate that they're in, and militarizing themselves for battle and action. That's what should be happening. But no, that's not what's happening. So I thought about the responses all night. It was bothering me. Wow, how we're all confused. Why are they? And that brought me to a little unknown piece of African culture. I think in 500 AD, the Persians invaded Egypt. And as you know, Egypt has been invaded by the Persians, the Arabs, the Greeks, the Romans. But on several of these invasions, Egyptians did what most people did in Egypt in these parts. They moved into the southern parts of Africa and western parts of Africa. One of these movements took them into the area of West Africa, where today we call Mali, and particularly Mali, I'm going to speak of. And these Africans from Egypt took with them their knowledge, their mystery systems. They took all the papyri that they could gather, and they took it to these places like Timbuktu, and there they began to reorganize and to rebuild their eruditions. As a result of that, many of these countries, particularly Mali, grew into a massive empire. Not based so much on domination and conquering like the Arabs, but based on erudition, knowledge. And as many of you know, the story of Timbuktu and the great knowledge that was housed there, but many don't know that when Timbuktu was invaded by the Arabs, the people took those manuscripts, that knowledge, that science, and they put it within their homes. And they dug trenches and buried it. They guarded it with their lives. And fortunately for us and the world, this knowledge was kept and protected. But it seems to me that some of this knowledge got out. And as we know, Europeans have been plagiarizing African knowledge for centuries. Which brings me to the term Nomo, and brings me back to the king. Many people wonder why and how Trump is able to excite his base, such an ignorant, unlearned man, who we all know so far, who demonstrates the worst of barbaric European culture. I said the worst because there is some great European culture. But he exhibits this, and we can see he's a buffoon, and we can see that he's not very knowledgeable, but he has a great talent. And I believe that talent lies in somewhere along the line he was trained on how to use words. So such terms as the big beautiful bill, make America great again, resonates with his base. And you wonder why, because the terms have no truth in them, and there is no validity to anything he says. America was never great. It tried to be. So to be great again is very difficult. But why do these words resonate? How does this excite his base again? I believe the shooting and all of this is just a distraction from the Epstein files that we've fallen for. And I'm not going to say me this time. I do most of the time, but not this time. And the recent barking and threats again against Iran, all of this in the same week that the Epstein files are being talked about. And again, he has successfully diverted the attention of the nation. But why do these words reverberate so destructively but energetically to his base? And I think I might know a little as to why. Which brings me back to the Nomo. So I'm just going to read instead of taking my words, but I want you to think about this. The West Africans, who we call the Dogon, are probably the harborers of ancient Egyptian texts and ancient Egyptian cosmology. You look it up. I'm not going to give you everything, but you need to understand cosmology. How do we know this? Because in 1930, a group of scientists made their way into the Dogon tribe and Dogon geographical area, West Africa, and found something that blew the world wide open. They found that these Dogon people were able to gaze into the stars without near a magnifying glass or anything. And I don't want to say that truly because magnification had been created in Egypt well before it was handled by Europeans for war. but were able to gaze into the stars and see something that Europeans did not see until they developed the hyper gigantic microscope, and that is called Sirius B. And when these scientists realized that Africans had observed the orbit of Sirius B in the constellations, they were mesmerized. Because in their view, these tribal Africans with no shoes and no suits or jackets were able to pierce into the sky and capture Sirius B. This lit the world on fire. But of course, like most information that comes out of Africa, this was subdued to the general public. But most scholars who were following this knew about this. Sirius B. Yes. Well, for the Dogons to see this, they had to be held in high esteem. They had to be investigated. We had to find out how. But fortunately for the Dogons, they managed to keep most of this information secret. Even though I hear in later days or later ages, Europeans were able to garner some of the information from them. But many of the tribes around the Dogon became angry at them for allowing that to happen. So the honesty is that we don't know how much of it they got, but I believe they got something. Why? Because when you understand Nomo, you might be able to understand why Donald Trump is so successful with having very little talent in doing what he does. And that is energize his base through rhetoric. Just a few words. MAGA. Big, beautiful bill. Make America great again. So I thought about it, and I thought about Nomo. I said, let me go back, because I remember studying this stuff about 10 years ago when I was doing a lot of stuff in Egypt. And as I get older, I'm not afraid to admit that a lot of this stuff escapes my memory. And that is why I have loads of books and notes that I've made. So not just for me, but when I leave here, my children and those my grandchildren can have this stuff. But I thought about this term Nomo and what it means and how it could be applied to both good and evil. You see, because in African religions, African spirituality, how can I say this? They don't believe in the spirit, which they call Amma, taking sides. Let me say that again. They don't believe in spirits, or let's say their God taking sides. So, for example, in Christianity, when the Crusades were going into Asia and fighting what they call the Saracens, they used a term, and the term was God wills it. And with that phrase, they would destroy, massacre thousands of Arabs and black people because God willed it. And this brings me back to the phrase, to Nomo. That in African spirituality, God doesn't take a side. God doesn't go for the Christians. God doesn't go for the Saracens. That's not what African religion or spirituality bases itself upon. What it bases itself upon is balance and harmony. Balance and harmony. Good example would be as we watch Mother Nature transition from a balance to a very unbalanced nature by the succession of storms, impromptu, not I don't want to say impromptu, but weather conditions that come from nowhere and strike us so hard. I shouldn't have to go too far because I'm sure everyone over the last 10 years has seen such a drastic change in weather conditions. And that is because of Ma'at. That is because of the balance. Because the colonizers not only want to colonize you, your culture, your history, but they want to colonize nature. And when you mess with Mother Nature, the balance becomes unbalanced. And when that happens, you better look out. because Mother Nature, and who I believe is God, has to correct itself. It has to stay in balance, or it's destroyed, or it destroys itself, because it cannot live in any other way, despite how hard the colonizers attempt to control it. Now, I don't have to go any further about controlling Mother Nature than what happened in Texas to those poor rich girls who were on camp, and this storm cloud arose all of a sudden and wiped them out. And everyone's come to find out that they were tinkering with the weather there, because that particular part of Texas was not getting enough water to produce whatever resource material they need. So someone created some sort of device that went up into the clouds and forced the clouds to dispense water. Unfortunately, they're not God. And what happened was a tragedy. But based on that thinking, harmony, balance, takes us back to these sayings that we hear. Now, if some of you are losing faith in your God because they're not straightening out Trump, well, you didn't understand God anyway. You see, because God is not a faith or belief. God is truth, knowledge, harmony, balance, nature, not a person, not a Christ, not a Moses, not a Allah, not a Muhammad, but a spirit, an energy that once released from you and you pass, moves on. It doesn't die, like an idea. You can't kill it. But this has not been the way the colonizers have thought since they become and took charge of the world. They do not respect nature, never did, and they pretty much tell you by the inventions of all these AIs and different contraptions that they believe is going to secure their position in the world to come. Another falsehood. So Nomo is this thing that I believe both sides of the debate can use. But when used correctly, it brings us back to harmony with nature and ourselves and who we are as divine people connected to the universe, as humans living, having a godly experience while we're present, because God is in everything. It's a part of everything. And Nomo is the thing that helps us recognize as small as little as we can the feeling of God, or you can call it what you feel, but the Dogon call it Amma. So when you see Trump and you see this reaction from his base, understand that this could be what you see happening, a part of what the Dogon, the Egyptians, have been studying and realizing for years. Speech. Please listen. The concept of Nomo. The word Nomo has several meanings depending on the cultural and historical context. Let me outline the main ones. West African Dogon, Mali. And let's not forget who's leading the way in Africa right now, Ibrahim Traore. I truly believe in 50 years, this Malian society is going to lead the world back to its redemptive state. They had lost one leader already, Thomas Sankara. They lost him, assassinated by the French and British and probably US as well. But now they have a new guy, because truth cannot be destroyed. And his name is Ibrahim Traore. And I'm so proud of him, as many Africans are. I've already seen young men in in United States with shirts on and making songs about him. But he's little known now. But the truth is marching forward. Let's continue and think of Mali as a progenitors of what's going to come about. And think about Nomo. In Dogon, the spiritual tradition of Mali, the Nomo are primordial ancestral beings associated with water. Yemaya, Santaria, Yemaya. They associated with water, creation, and the ordering of the cosmos. Cosmology. Read up on it. I don't have time to give you. You must do research, black people. You must read books. Drop your phones, and pick up a book. They are often described as amphibious, semi-divine figures sent by the creator god Amma to bring knowledge, speech, and balance to humanity. Nomo embody the concept of order, fertility, harmony, and often contrasted with chaos. Yes, because you can't have one without the other. It's like in Spain, one of the in Iberian Spain back in the Moorish period, one of the fractures between the Islamic factions was that the African Arabs practiced Islam differently than the Arabs from Saudi Arabia. The African Arabs could not forget the mother principle, while the Arabs from Arabia were more patriarchal. And this divided them. In Islamic Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, women didn't have to wear the pada, which is the covering. Africans allowed women to become as powerful as they did. Don't get me wrong, there was some patriarchy. But for the most part, Islam and this division over the role of women is kind of what destroyed Iberian Spain, or Muslim-dominated Iberian Spain. All right, so the two forms of practicing Islam, just like Christianity has its, the Shiite and the Sunni have their debates, but to understand the African practice and the Arab practice is very important. Let's continue. So I've started with the Nomo embodied the concept of order, fertility, and harmony, often contrasted with chaos. Oral traditions link them to the origins of language and social structure. Remember, we had the first language. We had the first social structures. Remember, Africans have been on this earth forever. Europeans, maybe 30,000 years, and then a form of civilization caught them where they were able to come out of the caves. In 6,000 years they've been around. But compared to us, they are infants. And that's why we see the world behaving the way it does, because you have infants running the world. We continue. Ancient Greek nomo, Greek is nomos, meaning law, custom, or norms. Now let's be very sure, let's be very clear. We know the Greeks, and many of them admit it, stole everything, plagiarized everything they know about civilization from Egypt. And you can now, I don't have to cite the books, the papers, and the great Greek philosophers who admitted this. You do the research. Philosophically, it contrasts with physis. So Phys, Greek, means nature, physis. Nomos, N-O-M-O-S, equals convention, rules, human-made order, Greek. Physis, Greek, equals the natural inherent order of things. So these are Greeks proclaiming Egyptian science and philosophy and trying to apply it to their people. Remember, Socrates was murdered. Aristotle was run out of Athens. Pythagoras, I believe, was killed because they espoused these African tenets of philosophy, and because these Greeks were typically barbaric, they were not accepted by the Greek church or the Greek authorities. So they were killed because of these utterances, it's going to come back. Debates in Greek philosophy, what they call sophists or Sophie, you might have heard of Sophia. That is a term Greeks applied to Egyptian philosophy. Debates in Greek philosophy, sophists, Plato, Aristotle, often centered on whether justice or morality come from nomos, social convention, or physis, natural law. So the argument was, did justice, morality, right and wrong, justice, being right, was this something that came from social convention, meaning someone putting this together, or is this something that comes from natural law, as the Egyptians would have told them? Because the Egyptians observed the world around them. And then with their great intelligence and intellectual, they copied it, and then they immersed it within themselves and applied it to their spiritual development. Know thyself. This is where psychology comes from. And if you ever read Freud, you will see that he was a big supporter of Egyptian cosmogony and philosophy. Yes, read his books. I have. He's not the person, this psychoanalytic crazy man that the Europeans have made him out to be. That's why you can't read his stuff. But I have. Egyptian administrative unit, nome. Now, I'm going to go through this quick. A nome was simply an Egyptian district that they used purposely for agricultural purposes and for rulership. Because Egypt was also imperialist, theocratic government like the Iberian Peninsula at this time. In ancient Egypt, the Greeks used the word nomos to describe the regional provinces of Egypt. So you know that nomes, even that word nomos, are Greek. And they use this to describe where the Greeks lived geographically, in little districts, like we call today District 8, District 9, District 12. Each nomos was governed by a local administrator and was both a political and religious district. And I use that word religious very, very sensitively. Because Egyptians did not have a religion, did not believe in such confined apparatuses to produce their concept of spirituality. So the concept of nomo could mean a spiritual ordering principle, the dogon nomo, a social legal ordering principle, Greek nomos, and an administrative territorial divisions, which we just talked about. All right, so let's talk about nomo in the spiritual African sense. Nomo as a word, power. Now, I want you to think about this as we think about what's going on with Trump and his utterances. Nomo as a word, power. That points strongly to the African/Dogon concept of nomo in the world view. Nomo was a word. Nomo isn't just a mythic being, it's also the principle of generative speech, meaning speech that you make and you generate. Among the Dogon, Mali, the spoken word is not only a communication, but a creative force that shapes reality. Yes, language and words shape your reality. Rap, classical music, are all realities created from words and song. When you say something bad about yourself, you've created a reality just by uttering these words. When you succumb to whatever religion that you love and you begin to use the language of religion, you have succumbed to that particular device, that language as a device. So among the Dali, the spoken word is not only communication, but a creative force that shapes your reality. Yes. It's like racism. Racism is a reality that has been shaped by the conquerors and by the Europeans. There was no such term in existence before Europeans existed. To speak, the Dogon felt, is to manifest, to bring something into existence. If you've ever seen the movie, not Gladiators, but the movie, oh God, it skips me now, but with Achilles, where he gets killed at the end, and he's in his hut sleeping with his women. And while he's doing that, he's he's called and summoned by the king. And the king sends an errand boy to wake him. And when he wakes him, he gets up and he sees the errand boy. What do you want? And Achilles, and the young errand boy says to Achilles, the king has summoned you. We have a battle against a great foe. Please come. And as Achilles is dressing with his sword and putting his armor on, the young boy looks at him and says, Achilles, you have such a great reputation. I could never. How are you so brave? I would be afraid to go into war like you. And Achilles looks at him and says, that is why they will never remember you, because they will never utter your name. But me, I will live forever, because they are going to utter my name. And this is what the Dogon believed. Don't forget, Achilles was a Greek, Macedonian, Greek, whatever, but same area. So Nomo represents the power of the word to give life. The Africans believe you say one of your ancestors' name, you bring them to life again. When I use and say my mother's name, I fuel her. And they believe that this represents not only life, but restoring of balance and order to the world. Here are the core ideas. Speech equals life. Words are living entities. When spoken, they carry a spiritual energy. Order through speech. Nomo symbolizes harmony. Speech can heal divisions, establish law, and reconnect people with the cosmic balance. Word as a creative force. Just as in some other traditions, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. You remember that in Christianity? The Dogon believed the universe is structured through the power of sacred utterances. What you say, what you utter, what comes out of your mouth. That's why it's very important to what you say is what you believe. Human agency. To use Nomo is to recognize the responsibility of words. Speech can build or destroy. Speech can build or destroy. Speech can build or destroy. It could heal, but it could harm. Think Trump. MAGA. Make America great again. In short, Nomo, the sacred life force of the spoken word. It's the African idea that language is not passive but active, a tool of creation and transformation. Essence. Dogo, Nomo, essence, life force of speech, spoken word as a creative ordering power. Function, how things work. Words don't just describe reality, they bring reality into being. Dr. Amos Wilson talks about this. What's your reality? How you think and live is your reality. That we're living in a reality that is false, that is not built on work. The Europeans in the 14th century woke up and all of a sudden created somewhat of a civilization from nowhere. A barbaric people in medieval times drenched in poverty, oppression, and over 150 years rose to dominance. How did that happen? Like a baby going from an infant and forgetting the stage of adolescent development into a human being. That is not natural. Flowers grow from little bitty plants and seeds and blossom. They don't go from a seed to a flower. But this is what happened to Europeans. Shahid Bolson the other day said, just because Europeans have conquered most of the world, civilizations don't make them civilized. And as we can see through their behavior, from one end of the globe to now to the other, that their behavior is not one that we would recognize as civilized. Function words just don't describe reality. As I said, they bring reality into being. Speech heals, unifies, sustains balance. The misuse of words disrupts harmony. Essence, reason, word, principle, cosmic order. Essence, law, custom, convention, human made order versus physis, man made convention. Function governs humanity, governs human society through agreed upon norms and traditions, not dominating, not oppressing, not taking, stealing, and plagiarizing. Philosophical debate. Sophist. Sophie is a term the Greeks used to describe what the Egyptians were doing with philosophy and their constant debates on universality and human presence in the world and where it belongs. Justice is a matter of nomos. Plato and Aristotle, true justice is rooted in higher principles beyond nomos. And with that, I think I said enough. I think I made my point. Fear not, folks. What's going on in the world is hard to hold on. But fear not, because no matter what they do, it's not going to work. There has been no society that Europeans have created that's gone more than 400 years. Even if you count the Roman decline in 426 CE, that started somewhere around 30 BC or BCE, didn't last. Well, Spain, France, all of those, well, they weren't dominant for long. Except Egyptians, 18,000 years of not surviving, but as we just flowering, blossoming, creating, building, science, medicine, agriculture. 18,000 years to do that. You can't do it in 200 years, man. America, 400 years, maybe 300 years, and we're already showing signs of decline, which I believe is a one-way ticket. Ain't coming back. The decline is set, and you can't turn the clocks back because America has been built on lies, rape, murder, oppression, destruction. Make America great again? Think about the Dogon. Think about Nomos. Remember, Nomos doesn't pick sides. It's simply trying to balance. Don't look for your God to save you. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because the world has to get rebalanced. And how that happens, I don't know. But I do know something, that right now it's out of balance. We're trying to balance ourselves. There are good people on both sides of this. I mention all the time I have good white brothers, good white sisters, bad black brothers, and bad black sisters. But we're all in this shit together. And whatever ever happens, those people are sitting back saying, oh, I'm waiting for America to be great again. Who's sitting back thinking that they could destroy one part of the nation while they continue to subsist or exist. Look at history. It hasn't happened nowhere in history. It's the only thing, folks, we have to go by is history. That's why I tell my people and other people, study your history. You'll get the answers. It's not a mystery, as Professor James Small says all the time. History is not a mystery. You got to take the mystery out of history to really understand what's going on right now so that you can live and manage this sick society until at such time ma'at, or the balance, returns. And in the time that we might not survive it, but we have our children who can go on. And no matter what happens to you, the spirit continues to move on. Your spirit will continue, it will survive. The body might not, but the spirit will. And truth will always set you free. And with that, I will say Ashe, and I hope to see you later on today. I'd like to give a shout out to my daughter, whose birthday was September 12th. And again, I might have mentioned that my daughter works for the government as a veteran administrator in the Department of Veteration, helping our soldiers find benefits, find programs. She was a soldier. Half of the family on my father's side, everybody, my aunts and uncles during World War II studied in Paris and received their degrees there while serving for this great nation. My father was a soldier. My wife's father was a soldier. You can't come with that unpatriotic garbage here. There's no bigger patriot for their country than me. This is my country. My folks were here first. They were the first Americans. Everyone else is just a visitor. So take heed. Be calm. Reach into yourself. Sankofa. Go back. See what the ancestors did. And black folks, put down those damn phones and pick up a book and read.